Malcolm, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So this is selfishly for me, this is a perfectly timed conversation. I was telling you before I hit record, I launched a company this year, and it's the first company that I launched with the idea of selling it. And for me, it was never a thought before. And I started to pay attention. I started to have some conversations and connections. And I was like, I heard somebody say, you're not a real entrepreneur if you don't have a business you can't sell. And I was like, oh, and it was actually Andy Frisella who said it. And I was like, that's a fascinating thought. And I was like, let me start thinking about some things. And I've built out a business now where hopefully one day in the next couple of years I can exit from it. But you're the expert of this, man. And the way that you approach it, I think, is incredible. And we're going to get into it, like your company, how they do it, and how you really cater it to the person, what they're comfortable with, and all that stuff in between. But why don't we start with who is Malcolm today, and then we'll break down how you got there.
Wow, big question. Thanks for the intro. This is good. Candidly, I'm born and raised Austin, Texas guy. I consider myself kind of a grassroots, kind of down to earth folk. I love small businesses, and I got obsessed with these kind of blue collar, industrial, kind of boring businesses. I know that's cliche to say, but I really like them. I like them. They're simplistic. They're understandable. I remember I was in a conference in Las Vegas in 2018. It was kind of the internet 3.0 and all this cryptocurrency stuff floating around, and we'd have these breakout conversations. And I just remember I am a total fish out of water in this cybersecurity internet world space. Let me teach you how to do roll-off dumpsters and septic installation and manufacturing and all this kind of stuff, and I'll show you how to spice up those kind of industries. So I appreciate the intro, and really, me in a nutshell is I love Texas. I think Texas is an amazing state to do business in. And candidly, I love to just be a solution for that business owner that may or may not have a succession plan, some money that they can sell, that they know that their business is going to really be taken care of, particularly their employees and their long-term customers that they've built this reputation with. So that's me in a nutshell. I really try to carry on the legacy and the baton for that next phase of the business.
No, I love it, man. And so, it's fascinating to have, because obviously being in the space that I'm in podcasting and public speaking and all those things, my world is surrounded by, cryptocurrency, NFTs, like all these people who are, and by the way, I've invested in neither of them. They confused me. So I'm on the same boat as you. I don't even know how I'm doing this internet thing. But I think it's interesting to have this conversation about the blue collar businesses, because I think a lot of people, especially younger entrepreneurs, they almost don't even think that exists anymore. Like, how prominent is it really still in this country and beyond that people are doing this blue collar work that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there is some stats. This is the Mike Rowe coming out a little bit. There are some stats of, trades going down and trades doing all this. But I think there's also an opportunity to take those businesses that historically have been running off possibly one software, whether it's a QuickBooks or some sort of accounting software, and maybe they do some quoting or something out of another software. But for the most part, a pretty unsophisticated business and sophisticated. I always tell folks, like, doing a business from 0 to 7 figures is an incredibly amazing feat, and it takes a different skill set than it does that we do. So we take businesses that are doing like low 3 million, somewhere in that phase, to $12 million in revenue, and we scale them up using very similar playbook. I don't want to preach to anybody that I'm recreating the wheel. We really do try to just scale them up through software, low code, no code software, and allow us to build a business that has systems and processes and everything's documented. I think my team gets really exhausted when I say, can I get a document on that? Can that be documented? Is this documented? Hey, we just use this consultant or this vendor to do something. Is it documented? And so it starts to become a habitual process where everybody just documents everything. But I mean, I really think that that's a leveraged opportunity, not to give away all the secret sauce, but there's a lot of businesses out there that are transitioning on to new ownership that need to go through a phase of kind of souping them up a little bit in their sophistication.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's talk about, I want to dive into that a little bit as far as documentation. And how often do you go into a business and they're like, I know I do $3.2 million a year, but there's no real track of it. Like, how do you begin that process of really reprogramming the CEO or owner of that company and everybody else in between, other than being exhausting, going, is it documented?
Yeah, great question. So in our situation, we tend to run into business owners that are trying to exit to some extent. They are necessarily, they're coming up against, death. We call them the 3Ds. They're coming up against death, divorce, or disinterest. They have a forcing function that causes them to have to transition out. And so they tend to not stay on too long. There are private equity groups out there that I would say we're not quite like a private equity group, although we do buy private businesses. that keep the owner on and have them roll that equity. That's not my first choice. That sometimes is the case when we go through the negotiation process. But our goal is to really transition that business by taking the baton moving forward. And so I'm in a constant situation of de-risking people. The beauty of small business, and I really do believe this, is that you get to be that kind of niche opportunity for the employee as well as senior management and so on and so forth to take care of them in a way you can't do it in big corporate America. Although that they try, they give these amazing benefit package. When things need a transition because of stock price and EPS and all this kind of stuff, they have to make those decisions. I can go take care of the person that, obviously needs to be out because their daughter or son or whatever was just born and they need some extra taking care of moments, along the way, differently than maybe some other groups. And so I think that's unique about small business, is that it really is, quote unquote, a family taking care of family. And so you have to de-risk people in that process because they often have been there for a very long time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And obviously people are an interesting piece to the cog. Like, you don't understand, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about human behavior, right? When you go in and almost take over these companies in a way, how hard is it to communicate the changes and dealing with all the different personalities? Like, what's your approach to doing that when going in and taking over a new entire staff?
So there's two good questions. So there's two situations we run up against. We run up a situation where the gas has been taken off the pedal for a long time by that business owner. They're coasting, maybe they're growing 5% a year, maybe they're fluctuating up and down 5-10% a year, but they're staying relatively flat. In those circumstances, there's kind of two people underneath them. There's either somebody like chomping at the bit, ready to go, or there's folks that are just comfortable with the way it is. They like the predictability. They know how to deal with Bob and Sally and whoever. And so they like that. And they struggle to make that transition when I say, hey, my goal is to double revenue in 2 years. And to our point in the conversation we had earlier offline, like, when you make a benchmark out there that's that kind of poignant and direct, you make different decisions along the way. That's my framework of life, is when you set a goal out there, you're going to make different decisions to reach that goal than you were to have an alternative goal. And so when I make that statement, some folks do self-select, I don't want that kind of pressure, or I'm not, going to be able to manage that. And some folks that have been chomping at the bit are thinking this as like a complete sprint. And so they're like, oh gosh, Malcolm wants to do this in 2 years. We got to do this, that I've been waiting so long to be able to talk about or bring up or complain about, or whatever the case may be. Let's just ambush him with all these ideas. And so being able to kind of sift through that from a people side, where they maybe self-select and they don't really want to be a part of that next phase. And then second is those that are like, I want to do something here. How do I manage their expectations that everything can't just change overnight? Because we might actually break the system. That's the other real challenge, is like, you do too many things too fast and you might actually break the secret sauce that's been keeping that business there for 20-30 years. And so that's the management that really takes place, is kind of seeing those two different sides, analyzing who's who in those buckets, and then making sure correspondingly you manage their expectations.
Yeah, I love the idea of setting an aggressive goal and allowing those, lack of a better term, negative Nancy's to kind of weed themselves out, right? Because it was one of those things. I mean, I've seen it in companies that I've managed back before I was an entrepreneur. Like, you have those people who are just like coasting, and they're like, I'm just collecting a paycheck and it's great. And they show up to work and they leave. But then when somebody new comes in and you go, hey, this is what we're doing, there's going to be a lot of pushback. And a lot of times they find their way out the door.
Yeah, it's tough. That's a good point. It certainly is a tough circumstance, and you never want anybody to feel like you're asking them to leave, because I don't think I've ever asked anybody to leave whatsoever. I basically said, here's the culture we're having forward. Are you going to come on board? Like, I'm able, in your role, and candidly, like, the amount of experience you have depicts this. I can be more patient with you if you have longer experience, because what ends up happening for me is you end up creating a vacuum circumstance. If you leave all of a sudden, then there's a big hole I've got to fill. So talking about de-risking people and all of this, like, I've got to measure, what is the risk profile for this person leaving? How are they de-risked in this circumstance? And how can I push them a little bit, because I want to be able to get the ultimate result done. And candidly, I think this business, I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't think it has that potential. And the other thing that I think is really key for everyone to understand about these businesses is a lot of folks that work in them, they tend to be not employed by me, hopefully, but tend to be in circumstances where things just feel unstable. They are often taken advantage of for their trade, their skill. They're kind of, put on a job, taken off a job. income can often be very irregular for them. And so when I can show them, hey, if we double revenue, your stability at this company just goes up 10x, that's a pretty like eye-opening opportunity for them to be on board. And so that's another point that we really try to emphasize is I'm trying to create stability, create what we like to call in the industry like lack of lumpiness in revenue and all of the production schedules and so on and so forth. So you understand like your job is secure and you can be here for the next 5 years, which you feel great about. So there's a lot of cohesiveness that has to take place in all those components. But again, like I said, it's a sometimes a case by case situation, and it also is an opportunity for us to really create some value.
Yeah, how did you get involved in this type of business? Like my brain's going, okay, you go to college, and then how does somebody get involved in a business where you're buying these businesses, growing them, selling them, doing all that stuff? How does that even happen?
Yeah, great question. So 2016, I went back to grad school to basically recreate myself. Both my parents moved here from South Africa, entrepreneurship at heart. My mom's in database programming and management, and my dad was in import-export business. Now he runs other things with a good friend of his. But entrepreneurship was always in my blood. I thought I would create my own path, and then, slightly derailed that and went back to grad school. And so basically came out of grad school with the idea of I'll go own a business and run it and soak my teeth in it. And I started getting more and more exposed to opportunities to play a very particular type of role. I was originally a part of another partnership in the Texas Hill Country area. We were buying blue collar industrial type, or sorry, I apologize. We were buying food and beverage businesses. And we started interacting with these kind of blue collar guys. And so we would interact with the HVAC installer, the septic installer, the roll off dumpster guy, whatever the case may be. And I started building a software stack, low code, no code software for us to source deals. And it occurred to me like these guys, like the only thing stopping them from going to 7 figures is basically figuring out how to drive revenue and then solving the problems afterwards. And so if I can get really good at how do we drive revenue and then create amazing opportunities for leadership to be a part of the solving of the management and production schedules and all that kind of stuff, there's a huge unlock for these businesses that have been sitting in the dark ages. I'll never forget, there was a business that we were looking at. It was a food processing business in San Antonio. Been around for 50, 60 years. Great story. Two brothers and a cousin were running it. And we came for a site tour, and they were running their pricing sheet on 2 sheets of paper where they would essentially like manipulate the paper to decide what the price was of that day. And I was sitting there looking at that, and as well as their computer for their inventory for the next day. And I realized that they were going to be short. And I actually asked them, I said, hey, based on what you've told me, I think you're going to be short in this one particular SKU. And they looked at it for a second. They're like, oh, we actually will be. And so I think just the opportunity to go into these businesses that have been run a certain way for a long time and have a different pair of eyes was a real unlock, I think, for me to realize, hey, this is where I can create immediate value in a space where I feel like we can be competitive and maybe we're not fighting against institutional money all the time.
Oh, I love it, man. And so what do you look for before you go in to buy a company? Like what are some key points that you're looking for? Maybe even like, let's go beyond the actual scope of the job itself, like numbers, staff, all that type of thing. And then what makes a company, once you're ready to unload, right? Like what makes a company desirable for somebody to buy?
A lot of these businesses are what I call centralized businesses around the owner. So when you are driving a business from 0 to 7 figures, you're trying to get as many people on board at the cheapest price possible and just 1,000 hands you can get from anywhere around the world to just get it done. Then it becomes a different set of systems after that. A lot of owners struggle to transition. There's a lot of businesses that are doing low 7-figure revenue out there. And they just struggle for that next set of skill set where they no longer are this centralized aspect of the business where everything's run through them, everything's approval. They got to approve every $100 spend. They've got to check everything. They're running everything off their accounting, or not their accounting software, but they're running it off their checking account and rather than their accounting software. All of that. That's where I look at how hard will this business be to transition them from being in the middle? Do they have the key customer relationships? Do they have all this knowledge in the industry? Maybe they hold licenses, which is a big one in home services, HVAC, and other plumbing companies and things like that. What's that transition going to look like for that owner is a big one. And so that's kind of that meat of, can we step in and put in our process? And then simultaneously, how stable is this business looking forward into the industry? Is it every single week we're competing for new revenue? Is there some sort of reoccurring aspect to it? How does this stay consistent? Because if you have revenue that's relatively predictable, you can make a lot of mistakes in the transition, and you will. There will be things that were just the secret sauce of the business, and you're like, wait a second, I should have kept that. Or, hey, everybody showed up with no uniforms. I switched them to uniforms, and now everybody's grumbling and complaining, whatever the case may be. There's things that just happen. And so, what is that transition going to look like for the owner, and their relationships within the business? And then simultaneously, what's the revenue aspect going to look like to keep this business kind of afloat as it goes through its transition?
Yeah, what kind of systems and processes, give us one or two, should a company instill into them to help them grow and then potentially exit at some point?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is I think of most of the low hanging fruit that's possible within the business is what we do first. So when we go in, we look at the quoting system. If they've kind of manually quoted or sent out quotes in PDF or whatever their system was in the past, we hired two virtual assistants from the overseas. The team knows who they are. They go directly in. This is exactly what they do every time. And we scrape the last 4 or 5 years of just quotes of the business, as I consider low hanging fruit, people that were further down the pipeline, and being able to go tackle them as soon as possible. Again, I don't think this is novel, but we're just incredibly aggressive to where can we get quick income and where can we make a quick stability transition for the business from that perspective. And then simultaneously just plugging those into our CRM. And then we have folks that come in from a copywriting perspective and start driving revenue depending on where they're located. Sometimes we have international exposure. There's different techniques for that. If we have more domestic exposure, there's different techniques for that. And so again, stabilizing the business with people that are already partly down through the funnel rather than trying to always generate top of funnel interest is really what we focus on in the first 100 days on part of that transition.
Yeah, one thing I've realized interviewing hundreds of successful entrepreneurs is a lot of them at a younger age competed, whether it be in sports or something like that. You were a college athlete, you played tennis, you did all these things. What did you take from your tennis days that you feel you're still utilizing today in order to lead, in order to charge forward, all those things?
Man, I've never been asked this question, so you're putting me on the spot. This is good. First thing that came to mind, honestly, in tennis match, and I think that this is something that also happens. So I run Ironmans now. I'm going to run my first Ironman in Cozumel in November, so I'm excited about that. First full
Congrats, man.
Ironman.
That's a commendable thing, man. That's no joke. So kudos
Yeah.
to you.
Tell me about it. It feels like a part-time job or full-time job in itself. So, but yeah, nonetheless, I think consistency over time and understanding what's transpiring in front of you and being able to react appropriately. I think sometimes, and I've actually had a mentor that explained to me this one time in a different context, and I think I never really thought of it this way until late in hindsight. But a tennis match is a 2 out of 3 in college and other situations. It's 2 out of 3 sets. You can lose the first set and you can still win. And being able to understand that there's adjustments that can be made and recognize what did work and what wasn't working, and being able to let go of some of those things is incredibly important. So I coached for a period of time at my alma mater, and then when I was at UVA as well. And candidly, you had high athletes that were just capable of producing, and being able to have a moment of pause and kind of recourse correct rather than just going down the same path the whole way, I think has been an incredible understanding that I got from tennis days, and being able to make these kind of adjustments as necessary, but able to sustain that over a long period of time is what I've really found just as going through Ironmans and going through like kind of long distance training. Is it's the ability to be able to sustain a course correction, maybe not your natural take on things over a long period of time.
Yeah, dude, by the way, never being asked that question before, killer answer. Like it's that was just spot on, man. And I absolutely love it. So let's talk about this Ironman thing. What made you want to sign up for that? And what do you think is going to be the most challenging part of it all?
So 2019, didn't expect COVID to happen like many other folks. Got a little cocky and said, wow, my wife was running, longer mileage. I had a friend that had ran a Olympic distance Ironman or a triathlon. And I said, you know what? I've never run past a 5K. Why don't I start running? So it started with 5 miles, and life just kind of started taking over. And I think just the challenge started happening. I think one of the really cool things about Ironmans, triathlons in general, is it is, my opinion, the most humbling sport out there, just from my experience, because you have folks that come out that look like $1 million, and the minute you jump in open water and they're like, oh my gosh, there's some panic. And I think it's a real humbling sport to push yourself over a long duration of time and seeing how far your body can go. So I've done halves, and now I'm looking to do my first full. And candidly, it's an opportunity to see how far I can push myself. Can I sustain it? I ran in June this past year. I ran Escape from Alcatraz for the first year. That's one where you jump in the water close to Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, and you swim
No
across the
thanks.
bay. And yeah. And I can tell you that when you're looking straight down, swimming for almost 2 miles, and you know that it's like 50, 60, maybe longer. I've never actually checked, deep right there. And there's great whites in the water, and you can barely see in front of you, and all this kind of stuff. It really humbles you of like, what am I doing this for? So that was a really great experience. My body felt great this summer. I ran a couple other ones, and body just felt great. And I said, you know what, let's go for it. And I've had a good coach along the way and good people community here in Austin to help me keep pushing along. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how far I can push myself, really mentally, really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So there's a time on it that if you're under a time, you get the Ironman title, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, they have cutoffs. Each race is slightly different based on elevation change and all that kind of stuff. Cozumel, one of the fortunate parts of that race is it's relatively flat, so it's a good kind of intro. The swim is relatively not the hardest of all, but it's a good lead in. I think I have some dream races I'd like to run. Patagonia Man is one that's in Patagonia, and then another one called the Norseman, which is in Europe. Are these like incredible, you've got to get into the lottery. And so they're all Ironman distances. So my hope is that after I run this one, I can kind of stay in that same level of shape. And if I get into one of those, that would be amazing to kind of see again where I can push myself and do it a little further, even colder water and all those types of things.
Yeah, dude. I had a guy on my podcast probably a couple of years ago at this point. His whole story was he lived in a cult in Manhattan. He was a very successful lawyer and then somehow found his way in this cult. And he was like a free ocean swimmer when it's freezing cold. And he's like, dude, and he lives in New York. So he's like, hey, come and do it with me. I was like, absolutely not. There's 0% of me that wants to do that. Like, and honestly, a lot of it, dude, is like the sharks. Like, I just be like, what's in this water? You can't see. It's terrifying. But dude, kudos to you, man. I'll be following along to see how you do it. It'll be super interesting. So I want to ask you a question that I asked every single person on the show. It's a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Good questions. Definition of success. I got kids, so that plays a big role in it. And I think it's the ability to appropriately set a goal and letting those in and around you be able to see you achieve that goal with balance in your life. I think that allows for you to be successful. If I come up short of our goal, so we want to own 5 to 10 businesses in the next 10 years. I want to have leaders in each one of those businesses, and I want to sit on a Texas ranch and be able to develop those folks every couple of weeks. That's really my goal, and being intentional in developing these men and women to run these businesses that I think we really take care of it. So my kids being able to see how I'm doing building blocks along the way for that is incredibly important to me. I once heard a guy, he was running a fund of funds when I was in grad school, and he used to say, I want to be able to come home and sit around the table and be able to speak proudly of the work that I do. That's success to me. I might fall short of our revenue goals. I might fall short of our returns to our investors, all those types of things. But I want my kids to see like how a building block process works to the end goal that you're seeking out. That's big and maybe a stretch goal. So that would be success. Daily, candidly, I remember my wife saying, there's no way you'll change about this. I used to be a night owl. I'm not a night owl anymore. I go to bed at 9:30. You probably never get a hold of me, but you'll get a hold of me at 3 or 4 in the morning because I just naturally wake up at that point. So I have shifted what I would consider my deep work to the morning. So I do a lot of writing from like 4:30 to 6:30 before the kids get up, or I'm doing some kind of workout, depending on how many hours I need to get on bike and running and stuff like that. And then I block out my calendar until 2. I don't take any phone calls, anything like that. Pretty much anytime I can control it until 2 p.m. Is a big component of that. And then I really think that staying healthy and keeping yourself active keeps you out of a lot of other just really distracting things. It can be really easy when work is everything, or you're just cranking away at the computer. I tend to find when I'm just like not productive, I'll go jump on the bike and just ride in, even in a stationary bike situation, just to do something productive. It gets you in a different framework. So that's my life. Unfortunately, it takes up a big part of it. But those are what I think I do daily is really changing my schedule and being very, very restrictive on what I do during the day.
Yeah, dude, I love it. So I want to talk to you. In my mastermind, we talk a lot about work-life balance. or creating the life that we want around our business versus our business. And then we got to figure out life, you know what I mean? So we kind of approach it from a life first approach. And obviously being a parent, that takes a lot of time. Running businesses, that takes a lot of time. Training for Ironman, that takes a lot of time. So my question for you is, how do you approach that beyond just waking up early and getting those things off your list? How do you approach making sure that you are present at work, present with the kids, present with your wife, and then present while training?
Yeah, great question. It's a crawl, walk, then run circumstance, and I think that's for everybody. It starts off with just having real discipline block on my calendar. So my assistant, full kudos to her. She knows what my calendar is, and she's very restrictive on what can be put in there. It's very limited chances it gets into the wrong block. And so that was a restriction I put in place. And when she came on board, I said, this is my most important thing, to be able to make sure I have these types of blocks. And we've had to make some adjustments along the way to fine tune that. But being able to do that, and candidly, I think it's just communication. Like, hey, I'm going to get this done in this hour. I will not be available for the next 2 hours. Know that you need to get the most urgent things possible. And then one of the other things, as a constant theme, I spent a lot of my time on the personnel side for sure, but also in revenue generating opportunities. So my assistant knows I've got a to-do list daily. She loads it up with certain things that need to get done in a day. And those usually are the ones that get done from 4:30 to 6:30. And they are almost exclusively revenue generating, or some way of getting people in the door that will also produce high opportunity kind of circumstances. So we spend a lot of time, podcasts like this, interacting with folks that want to be a part of the businesses that we're buying, want to be a part of the vision we have. And so I spent a lot of that time working on that, cultivating that, building up the bench of folks. So yes, I think it's a big part of just communicating kind of the goal, and it's easy to start a goal and people to be like, oh, we'll see how long this lasts, but to sustain it over a long period of time, people understand like this is his way of doing life, and you've got to be able to adjust and course correct along the way. So that's my answer. I hope that's sufficient.
Dude, no, for sure. It's a forever evolution, right? As we're trying, we don't know how to human. We're figuring it out as we go. And so to be able to course correct and being aware that like mistakes are going to happen, I think that's super key. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there, let's get to the good stuff. How do people get more information about, I might say it wrong, Sitcera. That's right. So how do they get more information about Sitcera? How do they get in touch with you? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, so just a background on Sitcera. We're a holding company in Texas. We buy blue collar industrial type businesses. I roll up my sleeves. I get involved in them. I love small businesses in Texas exclusively. You can get a hold of us at sitcera.com. It's spelled TSETSERRA. Phone number's on there. I answer 90% of the calls. You can really get a hold of me by shooting me an email on there. But we really do. We love Texas businesses. We want to be a part of that. And our goal is to continue on doing that for the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So why the love of Texas? Obviously born and raised there, but I think once you become an adult, you can adjust those thought processes. What's the love of Texas?
It's a great state to do business in. I understand the laws. I understand the tax implications. And when someone has a Texas workforce issue, I know what's going to happen for the most part. And so I understand it. And I think it's the 9th or 10th largest economy in the world, depending on who you're talking to. So it's a great opportunity, and there's a lot of great businesses that have been born here, raised here for a long period of time, and it's allowed these businesses to be real staples in their communities, and that's where the name comes from. My great grandfather owned a big farm, 70,000 acres at the border of Mozambique and Zimbabwe before they moved to South Africa and moved to the States. And it really was a beacon in the community to take care of both the employees and the community at large. And so that's what we try to do the same way. And so when I can communicate that effectively and people understand the message, they know that their business is going to be taken care of as well as their employees.
I love it. And if COVID rolls around again, you're not shutting down, since you guys proved that the first time. So that's always a good thing, right? You don't have to go find a restaurant that is breaking the law to stay open.
That's right. That's right.
I love it, man. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
I had a mentor, and I won't tell you who he was, but I had a mentor that I followed for a long time. I learned a lot of things from him. There's a lot of takeaways, but I started to observe his life, and there wasn't the cohesiveness that I wanted in my life, and I had to let that go. And that was part of my reason to go to grad school. It's part of my reason for making that change. There was somebody, again, I respect in a lot of ways in his industry. I respect in a lot of ways and other aspects. But being able to say, hey, hold on a second, with a, wise mind or whatever you want to call it, this is not the trajectory I want to take my life in, and be able to let go of that was, I think, a huge growth, and allowed me to say, my life is bigger than the trajectory it was heading on. And it's okay that it's a little gray and it's a little unclear at this point, but I know for a fact that my life shouldn't go that direction. And let's let kind of the whimsicalness of life just take a hold of what's going to happen. But being able to let go of that, I think that was a big moment in my life, and a big course correction that could have set my life in a totally different path. And I'm grateful for that change that took place.
I love it, man. Self-awareness is so key to success, and clearly you have it, dude. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with my audience, and for doing what you do for so many people, right? Like, I think when we break it down, yeah, we just talked about business, we talked about, systems and processes, but at the end of the day, it's about helping people sustain a good life for themselves. And you're doing that time and time again, man. I can't wait to hear about you on your ranch in the future with 5 to 10 businesses and your kids enjoying it with you, dude. This was great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.